Striped Life Officials Podcast with Jeff Landers.
Hello and welcome in once again to Striped Life Officials, the podcast. I am Jeff Landers, and today we've got a good one with football season right around the corner. We're going to be talking about head injuries and concussions with one of the nation's top researchers and a good friend of mine who I've known for quite a while since I've been in Eastern Idaho and doing media outlets. I'm going to bring her right in, and this is Caroline Smitty Faure.
Hi.
Smitty, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jeff. I'm excited about this.
Of course. And it is an official, our top priority is always the safety of the players. And so I think this is going to be one of the most important things people can listen to or watch if they're an official coming into the fall months. So let's get right into it. If you could just give me a quick definition. There's a lot of misconceptions about concussions.
Yeah.
They think, it's just a brain bruise. But what is a concussion? Can you give us a definition and some examples?
Yeah. I think a lot of times, back in the day, 15, 20 years ago, we would have thought concussion is something that had to involve a loss of consciousness. And thankfully, we're beyond that now, and we know a lot more about the injury. I guess in simplest terms is concussion is a brain injury. It is damage to the tissues of the brain, the cells of the brain. And it leads to some type of dysfunction. So as far as you as officials are seeing, a lot of times you may see an athlete get dizzy or dazed or confused, even if it's just for a few seconds. It's not necessarily something that we're going to diagnose as concussion right there on the spot, but it is something that we need to understand is a precursor for concussion. And it's definitely something that if we see an athlete get dazed and confused or knocked out unconscious rather, or, they're just not right. They maybe have those vacant stares or confused or just not really know where they're at. Those are all reasons that we need to remove those athletes from play and let a qualified health professional take over and look at the evaluation. It's certainly not something that we want to encourage the athlete to play through. Because if we do, then we could subject them to a much more significant outcome.
And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, I have a slide from Professor Faure, who is kind enough to share her classwork with us. And it reads: the clinical definition of concussion, a traumatically induced transient disturbance of brain function that involves a complex pathophysiological process. If I can get all those big words ready or right.
So basically what that is, and I'm no pathophysiologist, but those folks would tell you that, I guess, I get scared when I talk about this because I don't know a ton about the pathophysiological response. But basically, there's an increase in glucose, there's an increase of calcium, there's a decrease in magnesium, and a decrease in brain oxygen levels. All of those things happen with the chemicals of the brain. And then you've got the neurons of the brain, which are those in the cell of the brain, the long neurons or the axons of the brain. Basically, when an athlete gets hit from either a coup or a contra coup force, there's a good slide with the brain neurons. When the athlete gets hit either directly to the head, whether they get a direct head-to-head contact or head-to-body contact or head-to-ground contact, or it may be something that they get hit in the chest and their head whips backwards, kind of like being in a motor vehicle crash when you get hit head on and your head whips back and you end up with a headache afterward. Those kind of responses lead to a twisting or a contorting or shearing of those tails of the axons of the brain. Those are things that we cannot see on any type of magnetic resonance imaging or MRI or CAT scan. Those things we cannot see. They are at the microscopic level. But those are the things that lead to these disturbances, that lead to these symptoms of concussion that can be anything from that dizziness or the headache or visual disturbances or sensitivity to light or noise or balance deficits, etc. So those are the things we've got to watch out for. And since we can't see these cells of the brain get injured, we just have to assume that response or those symptoms that the athlete is experiencing is indicative of this shearing of the axon. So it's something that we have to pay really close attention to. And we keep using this phrase over and over again: when in doubt, sit them out.
That's a great phrase. And for those, again, who are listening to this, what we're looking at on this slide is a picture of the cells in the brain and what looks like, healthy connections, and then a twisting or a shearing. And when I see this picture, what I'm reminded of is when you go to, you have audio or visual cables and you have to twist them to get them into the slot when they're hanging out, like when you go to connect a subwoofer to the speaker sort of thing. That's you twist those little cables inside the wire and you stick them in the slot. So if you're listening, that's kind of what it looks like. And you're saying we can't see this at all, so we have to go by the symptoms.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good analogy that you use, Jeff. It's like a short in the cable. You see the tail lights flickering or everything, and you don't know where it's at, and you got to go figure it out, and you got to troubleshoot. And that's a lot of what we do with our concussion evaluations. We have to go and troubleshoot to find out where that short is at. And a lot of times, I think it's important to understand that we're not necessarily diagnosing a concussion right there on the field. We're recognizing the signs, symptoms, and behaviors of concussion right there on the field. I think a lot of the criticism that we get with concussion evaluation and concussion diagnosis is people think, oh, you're just going to call it a concussion and my kid's going to be out for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And that's not necessarily the case. If you have a really highly skilled medical professional evaluating these concussions and taking care of your team on the sideline and off the sideline, then we can do a pretty comprehensive concussion evaluation. And a lot of times it isn't concussion, but it's a whole lot better to be safe than sorry. We know as clinicians that we're not going to probably diagnose concussion the same day. We're going to treat it like concussion. We're going to give it a couple days to kind of settle down and to display itself, and then we'll make the call based on the kid's, reaction to the traumatic event.
And we as officials, since it's such a visual thing, we need to be on high alert, especially on the football field, because we'll go through some stats here that football is one of the biggest causes of concussion among American athletes, even possibly worldwide. You could probably tell me better on that. But we as officials can see it, and there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I saw something, send the kid off, even if it's just for a play. That way, guys and girls who are officials, at the very least, the legality of it, you can say, I did what I thought was right for the kid, because you don't want, for legal reasons, you don't want parents coming after you because you may have seen something and then didn't send a player off. But it's also just right to do by the athletes to send them off if you see something.
Well, one thing I want to, correct with something that you said is sending them off for one play. If you notice the signs, symptoms, or behaviors that are indicative of concussion, and it came from a biomechanical or traumatic force, the kid got hit, the kid got rocked in some way, either direct to the head or to another part of the body that the head whipped back, you send the kid out, and the kid does not come back the same day. I mean, that's very important, Jeff, because these kids, especially those under the age of 19, are extremely susceptible to this injury. And they can develop what we call second impact syndrome, where they have the first concussion, and then we give them an opportunity to get that second hit while the first concussion is sitting there and festering. And basically the simplest way to describe what second impact syndrome is you have the symptoms of the first, and then you get that second hit. And basically it sends the brain and the body into a tizzy, for lack of a better term. The brain ends up losing its ability to auto-regulate its own blood supply, and the brain continues to swell and swell and swell until eventually it just blows up. So that is fatal more than 50% of the time. Unfortunately, we have had a few kids in eastern Idaho here and around our state that have been or have been subjected to that. It's about 50-50 on that too, whether they've lived or died. But we've got to be really, really careful. So if you as an official notice these things, please understand that it's your responsibility to not allow these kids to come back in the game. If you send them off, don't let them come back in the game. That's really, really important. And I think that's especially important when you're working at schools that are smaller schools, or schools that maybe are not covered by a licensed athletic trainer, or who do not have a team physician right there on their sideline. That's going to be really critical. So if you're at a school where there's a physician there, or there's a licensed athletic trainer there, and they're saying, no, we're good, then I guess you're kind of transferring the legal responsibility, as you've said. But I'm a real staunch proponent of, and our law in Idaho also says there's no same day return to play if these athletes are exhibiting the signs, symptoms, or the behavior. So again, we need to let this concussion develop. Okay. A lot of times, the kid is going to be overcome by emotion of the game. You have to put yourself in the mind of a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid. And that football game on Friday night is the most important thing in that kid's life. That kid does not have the capacity to think beyond that football game and what's important in life, right? They're very tunnel vision with that game. And if it's a crosstown rival or division foe, then it's even bigger, right? So sometimes we have to step in and be the bad guy and make that decision. Now, most of the time, these things turn out to be okay. But do we really want to roll the dice and take the chance that it's not going to be okay? And that's what our law in Idaho is all about. And that's what the law in all 50 states in the country are all about. It's about saving those kids from their worst enemy, which oftentimes is themselves. I think a lot of times we want to put blame on coaches and think coaches are the ones that are going to put these kids in harm's way because they want to win the game. And my research has shown that's just not the case, especially here in the state of Idaho. Coaches want to do the right thing. Athletic directors want to do the right thing. A lot of times that the problem that we face with concussion and concussion reporting happens within the kid and within the locker room, that teammates and everybody else want to protect that kid and hide the secret. So just be careful with that and understand those signs, symptoms, and behaviors are things we have to watch for. And you just had a slide up there that showed those things. If you could throw that back up, I'll talk about those.
And I've got a question because we're going to look at the physical, cognitive, emotional, and sleep symptoms. How easy is it for a kid to hide these? He knows he's gotten rung. He took a big hit. And now he may be hiding a headache or, dizziness. Is it pretty easy to spot these things, or can they hide them?
Yeah, kids hide these, for sure. They hide them. And that's, one of my other not so shameless plugs of why we need athletic trainers in the schools, embedded in the schools as full-time employees in the schools, is because the athletic trainers get to know these kids and what is normal for these kids. And what is not normal for these kids. So they can kind of detect if the kid is trying to hide things. They can also develop relationships of trust with these kids so that the kids feel comfortable and feel free to report. So creating those environments or those behavioral changes with the kids and with their parents and with the coaching staff is a critical component of concussion management. Some of those things that we see on the list, the physical signs and symptoms of concussion, we can't see, right? We rely on the athlete to be honest in their reporting. Things like a headache, we can't evaluate a headache. We can just say, do you have a headache, and how bad is your headache? Do you have nausea? How bad is your nausea? We can see the person vomiting, but a lot of times they'll go vomit where no one sees them, and then they won't tell anybody. Things that we can see balance problems. We can see that athlete, that running back that runs up the middle, gets drilled by a linebacker, and gets up and kind of spins around a little bit and was like, woo, where am I? Right. And doing little circles. And we can see his teammates kind of pointing him in the right direction and getting him back to the huddle. So those are the things you want to look for as officials. Other things, visual problems, fatigue, sensitivity to bright lights, sensitivity to loud noises, numbness and tingling, feeling dazed, feeling stunned. Those are all things that we rely on the athlete to self-report. Same is true with the cognitive signs and symptoms of behavior. Sometimes we have to, again, this is where knowing the athlete really helps. And I'm also a strong proponent of getting teachers in the school systems really actively involved in understanding the signs and symptoms of concussion and being part of that concussion management team, because they see these kids in the classroom. They know what is normal for them, quote unquote normal, for their behaviors in the classroom. Are they having blank vacant stares at the wall, or are they bothered by the bright lights? Are they having trouble remembering things or concentrating? Do they answer questions slowly, or are we seeing a sudden drop in their test scores or in their the quality of their work? So those are the kind of things that we want to watch for cognitively. Emotionally, these are things that we can see, right? Or that we can observe, the irritability, the sadness. Athletes may feel, or concussed athletes or concussed individuals may feel more anxious. They may have an increase of emotions or spiked emotions where they may be crying when they're not normally criers, or irritable or angry or sad, or just kind of running the gamut on the emotions, or they may have just excessive nervousness. And then sleep disturbances, again, we have to kind of rely on the athlete a little bit on this, and also on mom and dad. Are they drowsy during the day? Do they have interrupted sleep, or are they needing more sleep than usual or less sleep than usual? Those are really important things. And I'm sure we're going to talk about management along the way, but while we're talking about sleep right now, I always get the question, should I let my child sleep if he has a concussion or if she has a concussion? Absolutely, let them sleep. But one of the things we want to really focus on is keeping their schedules intact, right? We don't want them sleeping all day, because then it's going to send the night sleep out of whack. Okay. And that's not what we want. We don't want to keep them home from school. We do not want to have them sleep all day. We don't need to wake them up every 15 minutes to see if they're okay. We want them to get nice, normal sleep and encourage conditions to get that kind of sleep. Rest helps the brain.
I think you just answered one of the questions I had written down, because it seems like 10, 15 years ago, that was kind of the rumor, is if you have a concussion, don't go to sleep, stay up. Now we know for sure that's not the case. Keep a routine.
Yeah, absolutely. We hear a couple of those things. We hear that, and then we also hear, maybe I should put them in a dark room, kind of the whole Mike Leach approach. Did I say that right? Put them in a dark room and just kind of let them sit there. And that's not the answer either. There are certain things like bright lights that are going to be annoying to some athletes that have that sensitivity to light. But have them wear sunglasses or restrict their ability to be exposed to those kind of things. In the school setting in particular, we go into schools and they have these nice bright fluorescent lights everywhere. And some concussed athletes that just sets them off. And when they're exposed to those triggers of their symptoms, that just makes their symptoms peak. And that makes them miserable, right? We don't want them to be miserable. We want them to just kind of deal with this injury, be as calm through the process as we can, because if we can kind of limit their exposure to some of these things that make them miserable, we can actually expedite the healing process.
Okay, you wanted to talk about management. We will get to management of a concussion for your athlete or your athletes if you're an official watching this. But concussions do happen, and I want to go over some of the stats you present to your classes. Between 1 and 1.8 million sports-related concussions are sustained each year in the ages 18 and below, and more than 400,000 of those are by high school athletes. 63% of all concussions occur in the sport of football. Mm-hmm. That is astonishing. Yeah. And up to 20% of all football players will get concussed each season. And then this is absolutely absurd as well here. An athlete who sustains one concussion is 4 to 6 times more likely to sustain another.
Yeah.
And then there's also prevalence to girls. We think football and boys and how hard-headed they are and how invincible they seem to play on the field, but it happens to girls too. Soccer, basketball, hockey, maybe sometimes volleyball if they don't get their head out of the way in time. But concussions do happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hit on the bullet points that I stress to my students all the time. 2/3 of all concussions happen in the sport of football. And as I say that, everybody think, oh my gosh, Smitty is so anti-football. I am not anti-football. Look behind me, right? I've got this whole Peyton Manning, this whole wall, my whole basement is full of football memorabilia. I love the sport, right? We just need to do things in the sport to make it safer. We need to do things in the sport to kind of take down that negative stigma that concussion is causing, and if we can do things like understanding that this is part of the game, and creating cultures of good reporting, of safe reporting, penalty-free reporting, then I think we can keep the game around a whole lot longer. But yeah, you hit on an important number. 2/3 of all concussions happen in the sport of football. Another one that you hit on is that 1 out of every 5 football players will sustain a concussion each year. So if you take a program like, say, Highland, that has 100 kids on their team, we can expect to see 20 concussions in that year. And while I was at Highland, that's what we were seeing, around 20 to 25 based on our enrollment numbers. And that's before we knew that statistic, right? Those are national statistics, not Highland High School statistics. So we just need to understand that they can and do occur. We also need to understand that that really only 1 in 6 concussions is being caught. So that's a scary number too. We're only catching 1 in 6. So imagine those other 5 that we're just exposing out there to a significant risk. So if we can get this number down right here that you're showing, only 1 in 6 concussions is diagnosed. That's my goal. Get that number down. Recognize that the concussions are occurring in these sports. We don't play a different game here in Idaho. We may be smaller kids or farm kids or whatever we are, but we're not playing a different game. We're just as athletic. We're playing the same game. The concussions are still occurring at the same rate that they're occurring everywhere else in the country. We need to recognize those concussions and take care of these kids when they do get hurt.
Absolutely. And
for sure.
And one of those stats I had up on the board for those who are listening, again, sports-related concussions account for up to 75% of all traumatic brain injuries. So not even the reckless driving we all complain about here in America can add up to the concussions sustained by sports athletes. Okay, now management. A kid gets hit. He's displaying signs of concussion. He sits out, goes home, wakes up Saturday morning, definitely not getting any better. What do we do? What's the process, and how do we manage it being a concussion from there on out?
Well, if it's okay, I'm going to take you a step back, because I think part of the management process, the management is a really comprehensive process. And I want to stress that no 2 concussions are alike. So while one person may get dizzy or dazed, another person may not. So it's really important to go through that list of 22 symptoms and to see if any of those are being exhibited or experienced. But good concussion management starts with one, having a really good medical professional that's specifically trained in sports-related concussion to supervise the concussion management care. And a lot of times we equate that to an athletic trainer, a licensed athletic trainer who is certified by the Board of Certification, licensed through the State Board of Medicine, and is on those sidelines in a full-time capacity that knows those kids and knows those behaviors. So that's super, super important. I recognize in a lot of Idaho schools, about 60% of Idaho schools, we don't have licensed athletic trainers. It's not the end all, okay? There are physicians, nurse practitioners, physician assistants throughout our state that also have specialized training in sport-related concussions. So we can rely on them. And when we can't rely on them, when we're still in an area that we're not comfortable with that, or maybe parents aren't quite sure if that physician or nurse practitioner or PA is saying the right thing, we have an incredible telehealth system through St. Luke's and through Portneuf Medical Center, among other places, that can deliver the absolute top quality of concussion care anywhere in the state, okay, and do those concussion evaluations. So that's the first thing. So in a lot of places, we do what we call concussion tests. And you see this all the time, kind of spoken about in the media with the NFL players. They have to pass their concussion protocols, et cetera. We use those exact same tests here in Idaho. About 1/3 of our schools, in fact, here in Idaho are using some type of baseline and post-concussion testing. Those tests are fantastic. because what they do is they tell us what the normal function of the brain is on a cognitive level, and on a vestibular level, which is balance mixed with motion, and on an ocular level. So those are great, okay? The one thing that we have to understand is that those tests that we're using here on our high school athletes, and also the exact same test, again, that the NFL athletes and college athletes across the country are using, those are not diagnostic tests. They don't tell us if an athlete has a concussion or if they don't have a concussion. All they are for is to produce that baseline number, or that standard by which that particular athlete should be assessed. Okay, so we're looking at that. So when we talk about concussion management here in the state, when we're talking about the best type of concussion management, we want to administer those preseason baseline tests on each athlete each year, to tell us what normal is. It's important with these high school kids in particular that we're doing them every year, because things change so much with high school kids, especially with a balance test. I mean, think of a freshman boy that's coming up. I mean, some of them have gone through the change and some of them haven't gone through the change. Some of them weigh 85 pounds and some of them weigh 165 pounds. There's a big difference there, right? And once they develop their strength and their balance, they're going to test differently in balance. So we want to do those tests each year.
I tell people, because I reffed everything during the basketball season from junior high girls all the way up to varsity boys. And the biggest difference is when you have a junior high night and you have 7th grade boys back to back with 8th grade boys, you go from one game to the next. And it's ridiculous how hard testosterone hits between 7th and 8th grade. And then you go up to the freshmen and it doubles. But they're still so awkward. And I tell people, freshmen and JV are almost the hardest to officiate, because they're bigger, faster, stronger than they've ever been in their lives, but they haven't grown into it yet. They haven't had that time to mature and to develop into it. So like you're talking about with those freshmen, you need to do those baseline tests every year just because of how teenagers grow and change.
Right. Absolutely. And I think when those tests were really, in the mid 2000s, we started using those tests right when they came out in the very early 2000s. 2003, I think, was the first year we used them, and they had just came out. We were on the bleeding edge of it all. I think a lot of schools that, they fell, I don't want to say victim, but it's kind of a good word here. We're going to pay the $1,000 or the $500 and buy this license and test all our kids. Great. But who's going to evaluate it, right? So if you don't have that licensed athletic trainer or that physician that knows these tests inside and out and how to read them, you're really wasting your money. Okay, so those are tools in our tool chest. And this is a term that I use with my students all the time, right? We have a lot of tools in our concussion evaluation and concussion management tool chest, and not all of them are appropriate every single time. So as concussion is such an individualized injury, we have to know which tools in our tool chest are appropriate to use. Those concussion tests like C3 Logix or Impact are absolutely fantastic tests when they're in the right hands of somebody that knows how to use them and knows how to read them. Okay, so that's the first thing in concussion management. So we get those tests, Jeff, and then we have this kind of number that, we tested them on a good day when they're feeling good and they haven't been hit or anything like that. And then let's say something happens to him, and then we retest. Here's where we make a lot of mistakes, okay, in the medical sense, and why, it's important that we have qualified people using those tests. We're not going to test that kid right then. There is no point to me using that same test if the kid is symptomatic. I already know my answer. If he or she is symptomatic, I am not going to let them play. I'm not going to do that test, because if I put them through a strain of cognitive examinations and speed tests and reaction time tests and all of these things, I'm just going to increase their symptoms, right? Because I'm going to tax their brain and they're going to be stressed out. Okay, so I'm not going to use those tests. So I will wait to use those tests until they're feeling pretty good, or they tell me they're feeling pretty good, and then I'm going to use those tests again. Before that, on the sideline, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk to the kid. Okay, I'm going to talk to the kids, see how they behave, rely on my understanding of this kid, go through a graded symptom scale checklist, which is looking at those 22 symptoms, asking the athlete to self-report if they're experiencing any one of those things. And then if they are experiencing those things, I'm going to ask them to tell me on a scale of 0 to 6 how bad it is. 0 is I don't have it at all. 6 is it's through the roof. I should be laying in a hospital bed. Trying to get them to understand that gauge. And those graded symptom scale checklists are also things that we can do preseason. So if you don't want to spend the $500 or $1,000 to get these fancy computer tests, you can do something as simple as a graded symptom scale checklist, which all of these symptoms and grade them on a scale of 0 to 6, and then count up their total score, count up what their total composite score is, but also how many symptoms that they have. And then also within each symptom, are any pretty significant? So typically, 1s and 2s, I'm not super worried about, but when they get into 3 to 6 range, I'm starting to raise my eyebrows and say, okay, this kid's not right. This is something that this kid is really saying is pretty significant. I think it's also important to understand that with these graded symptom scores, I always have a right temporal headache. I mean, I would grade it at a 1 or a 2 is normal for me. And a lot of these kids have these same things that is normal for them. So they're not going to be penalized later on if they are saying, hey, my headache's at a 2. I can look at their baseline and say, well, their baseline was at a 2 too. So that's pretty within normal limits for that kid. So we can do that test. I'll do the graded symptom score checklist. I'll run them through a quick balance test. Okay. I want them to, it can be something as simple as, standing on both feet with both feet together, hands on their hips, eyes closed, and have them hold that for 20 seconds. And then do the same exact test for 20 seconds on one leg, holding on one leg, balancing on one leg. And then another test where their heel is touching their toe and they're at an angle, hands on the chest, eyes closed for 20 seconds. So those 3 tests, I can test them through that double leg, single leg, and tandem stance. So I'll do that test. I'll do a quick nystagmus test to look and see how they're tracking and see how their eyes, if their eyes are fluttering or if they have any weird sensations with their vision. And then I'll also do some quick cognitive tests on the sideline, just asking them questions. We don't want to ask them, do you know where you're at? Do you know what your phone number is? Do you know what your name is? Okay. Those are questions that are autonomous. We know those answers, right? I may ask them to tell me what month of the year it is in that way. What day of the week is it? Tell me what the last scoring play for your team was. Okay. Tell me the months of the year in reverse order, starting with last month. So now they have to think, what was last month? And now I'm going to go backwards from that. So asking them questions like that to get them to process that information, to think, listen, process the information, and now tell me. So I'm doing those kind of things. Give me digits. If I give you digits, I want you to give me these numbers in reverse order. So if I say 1, 2, 3, you're going to tell me 3, 2, 1.
2, 1.
Again, They have to listen and think, process, and recite. So those types of questions are what I'm doing on the sideline that's going to determine whether or not I'm going to allow that kid to go back in or whether this was just a fluke. If they can't pass my sideline tests, there's no way I'm letting that kid back in, especially a kid at the age of 18.
I'm sitting here thinking, can I do the months backwards without a concussion starting? I don't know. I never tried it. I guess I'll have to. I'll have to try it out on my daughter, see if she can do it. She's only 6, so she might need some help. But okay, so we've gone over what we need to do. But if you're a mom and dad out there and there's no magic elixir to just get rid of a concussion, like you said, don't just stick them in a dark room. Don't let them sleep all day. What are some of the things we can do? Maybe they do need a lighter course load at school so they don't feel stressed by it. But what are some of those other small things that mom and dad can do just to make it that much better?
Well, I think it's important. I think you flashed this slide up a little bit ago, but 7 to 75% of our athletes are going to get better within 14 days. I think that number 14 days is really what we can expect with these high school kids. There have been a lot of tests nationally that look at concussion and how long it tends to linger and how long its effects last, or how long it takes for that tissue to heal in the brain, those axons of the brain to heal. And typically with kids under the age of 18, it's about 2 weeks. Okay. When we compare that with college kids, college age kids are taking about 3 days. So just because you see these rules of being applied at Boise State or BYU or wherever it may be, doesn't mean we can apply those same rules to high school kids. That brain is exceptionally vulnerable, very delicate. Think about your adolescent years and how much you're progressing psychologically and maturation and everything else. Your brain is working overtime during those adolescent years. So we have to understand that it's extremely vulnerable during those times, and that's why it's going to take so long. So as far as mom and dad, one, try to find somebody appropriate to manage that concussion. That's the first thing. Don't guess, right? Don't put any stress on the athlete to return to play. But we also don't want to be a helicopter parent. Okay. And by that, I mean, don't hover over your kid. That's going to drive them nuts. Okay. Especially these high school kids. And if you keep talking to them about how miserable they must feel, then the kid's going to think, oh my gosh, I must be miserable. Right. So let this kid heal. The other thing that we need to understand is we don't want to take them out of school. Okay. We don't want to take them away from their activities with their friends and all of these things. About 7 or 8 years ago, I would have told you that's what we want to do. We want to restrict those activities that are heightening their symptoms, but we don't want to take them away. Okay. So, going to a loud Kenny Chesney concert or Garth Brooks concert, maybe not the best idea if they're having a lot of noise sensitivity. But maybe going down to the local pizza shop or bowling alley is just fine. Okay. And just kind of hang with their friends. Again, we have to understand that the psyche of those adolescent kids, that is, for many of them, their whole identity is surrounding their friends, right? It's the most important thing in their life. So we don't want to take them out of that, but we may need to restrict how much time they spend doing that. We try to significantly restrict the amount of time they spend on devices. Okay. They don't need that so much. So, and looking at their little phone and texting and all that puts the concentration in a small little area with that awful light. And that just tends to intensify things. Gaming, same thing. So maybe if they're usually gaming, what do kids game, like 4 hours a day, at least today, maybe give them a half hour so that they at least have a dose of it, but then get them off of it. And if it intensifies their symptoms, have them stop. Okay. Mom and dad, you can regulate that by saying, okay, what is your headache level right now? Or whatever their symptoms are. What is your headache level right now? Okay. It's at a 4. Well, if it's at a 4, we're not going to game today. Okay. It's at a 2. Okay. So I'm going to give them a half hour of gaming. And now I'm going to go back to them after that half hour and say, where are you at now? Well, I'm at a 4. Okay. Enough. We're done today. Right. We still don't need them to game for 4 hours though. Right. We all kind of agree with that. But yeah, it's those kind of things. Make sure they're going to school. We want them as normal of a routine as possible. Like I said, don't interrupt them from sleep. Make them go to bed at their normal time and wake up at their normal time. Make them go to school. They may need extra help, right? Some of these kids that have more significant symptoms or may have lingering symptoms into post-concussion syndrome, which is the symptoms last greater than 3 months. Those kids may need mom or dad to write out a to-do list for them. These are the things you have to do today. And so that they get that reminder, these are the things I have to do today. We've had athletes that we've taken care of that it's as simple as we have to remind them to brush their teeth in the morning and to shower, and it can get that bad. But most of these kids just need a reminder or set a schedule for them. Okay, you're going to do homework from 4 to 5 or something like that. So the to-do list, teachers are the same way. Teachers may need to provide written notes for the students, provide tape recorded lectures, give them additional time to take tests, seat them in the front of a room or away from windows or away from doors where it's noisy and there's a lot of distraction. So typically we will prescribe those exact academic accommodations when we evaluate the student. And again, there's no one size fits all approach. It's going to be different to each person based on the symptoms that he or she is experiencing.
Now, you mentioned sunglasses if it's too bright, earplugs if it's too loud. Maybe you get those soft earplugs if it's too loud. But something you don't like, I'm going to bring up, are the soft top helmets covers that go over. So helmet, I think I've heard you say it this way before. Helmets are hard and slick for a reason.
Yeah.
Do I have your quote correct?
Yeah. Helmets are hard and slick for a reason, right? That polycarbonate shell on the outside of a football helmet is made to deflect hits. So the two helmets can bounce off of each other. They hit and they slide off of each other. And when we put those aftermarket products, those padded products on helmets after the fact, the helmets tend to stick to each other, and that tends to transfer the force directly into the helmet and to the brain, right? So there's that effect, but there's also that effect that when those helmets stick together and they don't just glance off of each other or glide off of each other, that can also expose the neck, right? So if the neck is flexed in any way, shape, or form, which hopefully it isn't, because kids should see what they hit and have their head up. If the head the head can stick, it can put the neck into forced flexion. So we just have to be really careful with those types of things. I think that's not even my biggest problem with any aftermarket products that go on helmets. It's just, I think that the way that the marketing is of these products, and I'm going to disclaim this with the Consumer Product Safety Commission, or the CPSC, has sent letters to hundreds of companies who are trying to capitalize on the concussion frenzy that's going on in the United States. We have a lot of moms and dads and coaches that just want to keep these kids safe, and they're just buying into the marketing gimmicks of a lot of these products. Well, I want to keep these kids safe, so I'm going to put this on my helmet, or I'm going to wear this fancy chin strap, or I'm going to wear this sleeve on my head when I play soccer. And what it tends to do is it tends to suggest that the athlete is going to be safer if he or she wears that product, okay? Or that concussion will be prevented, okay? No product prevents concussion, none. Let's get that out of our heads. Nothing prevents concussion. That is inherent in the game. We can minimize the risk for sure. Nothing is going to prevent it. The best way to minimize the risk, though, is through proper education. Kids, head up, see what you hit. Don't lead with your head. All of these things that we're doing, rule changes in the game. You know, I think about offensive linemen. You're a football official. Offensive linemen down in that 3-point stance, the very first thing they hit every single time is their head on something. Every single time. So I'm a proponent of two, that we need to look at that, because subconcussion is a big deal. Those small blows that just add up over time, and that cumulative effect. But yeah, Jeff, I think just be careful with any of those aftermarket products. I'm not going to tell you not to buy them. If you talk to me personally, I'd probably tell you not to buy them. If you were somebody close to me. I'm not a real fan of them, and the biggest reason is because they tend to give us a sense of invincibility. There is research out there that athletes, especially in the sport of soccer, female athletes will take more chances when they have one of those things on their head, that they dive for more balls, or they're more reckless with their playing style, and they end up getting more concussions as a result. So we just have to be really careful and know what they are and what they are not. I don't have any problem with those things on a helmet during a practice setting, just to control little things like subconcussive hits. I mean, I'm not too worried about that. I cringe when I see them in a live game. That's an uncontrollable setting. So that's when I really cringe.
And just for the record, when I was at the TV station here, for those who are listening, I did do a story on one of the high schools in the Upper Valley wearing them. And then Chris, who was at the time also working with me at the TV station, went and did a story on another high school down in the Lower Valley wearing them. And that's when we got two of these stories, and you're coming to us saying, hey, get these stories off. So I had done a story on them and what they had wanted to do. So you can, I'm pretty sure you can use the Google machine and find those stories out there. But that was before I was a young guy, and before I thought maybe I should ask, Smitty about this.
Yeah, and I want to say that I don't like them. There are plenty of people that do the research similar to me that they are fine with them. And there are a lot of colleges. The University of Idaho wears them, for example, in their practice setting. And I don't really have a big issue with them in those kind of settings. My issue is just this sense of invincibility and the way that they're marketing. And almost a pyramid scheme type of marketing platform where people get paid. This is how it was in the olden days with some of the products. And I'm not sure if it happens the same way now, but if you recommend or you refer somebody, then you're going to get money if they purchase them. And so they weren't going to the concussion experts like me to endorse their product. They were going off of coaches or former athletes who were scared of concussion. And that's how they were marketing their product and selling their product at trade shows and at coaches' clinics, etc. So I just, anybody can do research and make their research really, really good if they pay the researcher to do the research that they want done, right? I am not a fan. The people that are my mentors in research with concussion are not fans. There are plenty that I know that are just fine with them. So I'm going to let parents make their own decisions. For me, it's a no until I see something different, until I see some good objective research that comes out and tells me otherwise. I have yet to see that yet. I see a lot of research out there, but it's still either sponsored research or it's not addressing the concerns that I have. So, but I do see some value in them. But I'm still not a proponent in a live game situation. The other thing, Jeff, that we need to point out is anytime that you alter a football helmet, if you put something on the outside or if you change something about the football helmet, you are negating the NOC certification. So as an official, your responsibility is to make sure that the helmets are certified.
Legal.
If an athlete comes out, right? So if NOC isn't going to stand by and warranty that helmet or hold on to their certification of the helmet with some of these aftermarket products, then I'm not sure it's wise for you as an official to let them out there. And that's not all aftermarket products, but many aftermarket products. So just be familiar with what the NOC guidelines are, what NOC is saying about each type of aftermarket product and whether or not they'll continue to hold their certification. The testing that's done, the linear testing, the rotational testing, the drop testing that's done on football helmets is not done with those specific products when they put that sticker on there. So if you're confused or you just want to know more as an official, I'll let you guys take it from there. Some of them probably are okay, but some of them are not.
Great. We're 45 minutes in, and I've got just a few more questions. But you mentioned rule changes, heads up football. USA Football, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was an initiative by the NFL to help filter down some of these rule changes and tackling techniques is what I'm looking for. So your heads up when you tackle with your shoulder, grab them with your arms and roll them. So that way you're not leading with your head. They're getting targeting out. So you can't launch and go after somebody above the shoulders. Have we seen any real progress in concussion numbers with these changes that have been made over the last 5 to 10 years?
Absolutely. The numbers are going down. And I think that the biggest thing we're seeing, and a lot of the big purpose of those rules are to create behavioral changes, to teach the kids to do better. I just applaud guys like Pete Carroll in the NFL with the Seahawks. I mean, he's a staunch proponent of that, right? Just tackle the right way. I think, you and I both have past as sports reporters and in the media and all of these things. And man, the best highlight we could ever show on the news at night was that boom, kid getting lit up, right? I mean, that's what we were looking for media wise. We wanted to show that. And we needed to do a better job too, because it's the media's glorification of these big lights out hits. We've got to stop glorifying those things as society. We need to stop saying that those are really, really cool or suggesting that they're really, really cool. Those are bad, right? When we try to hurt somebody, that's not what the game is all about. That's not what we want to keep with the sport of football. And I'm sure that there are some out there that are listening to this and say, oh, that's exactly what we want in football. Man, this is a gladiator sport. If you can't handle it, get out, right? But if we're going to save the game, and if we're going to save ourselves from the criticism of the game, then we've got to change that glorification of those types of hits. And so those rule changes that you mentioned, that's exactly what that's doing. It's creating behavioral changes in the sport. We're also seeing things like eliminating the kickoff, that the run back where you got your bullet guys on the outside going down and their job is just to hit hard and make that play. We're seeing that going away, or we're seeing the kickoff being moved up 10 yards or 15 yards. So the likelihood of it being in the end zone and no return is higher. We're seeing rule changes to get offensive linemen out of that 3-point stance. So you're seeing things happen, and those are all really good things that really doesn't compromise the game in its purest form. But it does create a safer environment for kids to play for a long period of time.
I got just a couple more things before I let you go. Latest research suggests what, and I believe, your slides went into a lot of science, and that went straight over my head. But I believe I saw saliva tests might be coming down the pike for diagnosis. What was that? But what is the latest research saying?
Well, the saliva tests were really promising. This came out a couple of years ago. There was a study done with some rugby players in the UK. It was intriguing for sure, right? Because it's saying, oh, maybe we can take a spit test and know if their biomarkers are up. Again, looking at that glucose and the magnesium and the calcium levels, and say, oh, is that a concussion, or is there a possibility of concussion? Nice, and it's a step in the right direction, but that test is very limited. It was limited to about 1,000 athletes, only rugby players and only males. So we can't really know a lot from that. But scientists like that are doing promising work that as we continue to do things like that, we continue to learn more. I do want to say before we sign off, though, Jeff, a couple of things. One, I think that we all get really, really scared of this CTE thing. And is my kid, if they play football, is he going to get CTE? And I think we've got to get that out of our head. Those CTE studies are really limited to a very specific audience of people who, I guess it's a group that they would worry might have CTE based on the things that they experienced during their lives, right? They started getting aggressive or had personality changes, or they played in the NFL or were WWE superstar or whatever. So just because your kid plays football doesn't mean he or she is going to get CTE if they get a concussion. So get that out of your head. That develops over time. Unfortunately, there is no way to find out about that until they're dead and we can do a biopsy of the brain. But we need to stop linking football directly with CTE. Is there a relationship there? Mm-hmm. Is there a direct link? No. Okay. So let's get that out of our head. The other thing I want to put a shameless plug in really quickly is just for our Idaho Concussion Law. It's been 10 years since our law was passed. I just finished a study with Idaho's high schools, and we're doing just a remarkably good job with our concussion compliance in the state of Idaho. I think initially when we passed the law in 2012, we were really worried about rural schools in particular. And my study, which will be released here in another month or so after it goes through its review process, is showing that even our smallest schools in the state are really adapting to concussion management really, really well. We didn't look at how many, we did see how many concussions were diagnosed, but or reported, but we're not looking at the verification or validating those concussion diagnoses. We're looking more at, are schools equipped to make those decisions, and are they adapting to finding appropriate healthcare providers and immediately evaluating or immediately removing athletes from play. And I just want to applaud our athletic directors, our coaches, and our officials in the state, because they are doing what they need to be doing. They're recognizing this injury for something serious, and they're not letting those kids go back in until they get that written clearance. So those are really steps in the right direction. And I think what we've done in the last 10 years in Idaho here is really create a safer environment for all of our athletes in the sports setting at the high school level.
And that's fantastic. And it really, if you've ever been out into some of these schools that are out in the middle of the Idaho desert or in between two mountain ranges, they're very remote, but the education has traveled. And if we can do it here in Idaho, we can do it in small states. Our neighbors, Wyoming, Montana, are also small states, but you can do it in the bigger states too. And just keep an eye out for these kids. Smitty, Professor Faure, thank you very much for your time. I super appreciate it, and hope, if even just one official out there can notice the signs of a potential concussion and maybe help a kid, then our time has been well worth it. And I just want to say thank you, and let me know when that comes out.
Yeah, I will. And just another reminder to all the officials out there, and parents and coaches and athletes: when in doubt, sit it out. It's not worth it. I mean, just the chance that something bad could happen that would affect your life. I could tell you story after story of kids that I've taken care of, or our clinic has taken care of down here in Pocatello, that long-term issues, personality changes, completely different kids, just these lingering effects that make life miserable because they continued to play or they didn't manage their concussion appropriately. So just it's not worth that. Okay, it's not, you may have to sit out a game. You may not be playing next Friday night, but we'll get you back as soon as we can. Just trust us. Trust this. I hate to say that. Trust the process, right? Coaches say that all the time, but it is true.
Hey, I'm a Bills fan, so Sean McDermott, trust the process.
That's right. Trust the process. Yeah, it's a good process. It's one that's absolutely student-centered, athlete-centered. And that's what we have to remember. If we're not sure, and you as officials and coaches, you're not medical experts, parents aren't, and even if they are a physician, they probably should sit that one out and let somebody else do it that may be a little bit more objective. And athletes as well. We just have to defer. And that's what our law is about here in Idaho and all 50 other states. And certainly we're doing a good job, but we could still do better.
Great. Once again, Smitty, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Striped Life Officials. Go slow.